Now we'll get started. All right, I'm going to share my screen for a little while. I don't have a bunch of slides for you today, but I've got a couple of things I'd like to riff about to get us going here. You know how I can be. All right, happy Memorial Day weekend for those of you who actually get to have a weekend. It's not always guaranteed in our industry that you guys are going to get to have some time off. Um, you guys remember the rules. There's a raise your hand button if you'd like to talk about something. I'd be happy to put you on. Um, I keep the chat box open, but it's hard for me to see. If you've got a question, put it in the Q&A box. And this would be a great week if you've got questions to go ahead and start typing them in now. I've got a whole backlog of interesting questions you have sent me that I've not addressed, and I may get to some of those today. I've been riffing all week, so I did marketing videos. I've spent some time in client offices. And yeah, I'm kind of on a roll here. And I've got fresh coffee. Yeah. So I'm ready to take on whatever you guys have for me. All right. So here's what's on my mind. First of all, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I was wandering around on LinkedIn right before this, and I came across this and said, I got to put this in there. Some guy, Cameron Sepa, Dr. Cameron Sepa is on here. This was a long article. I just grabbed the graphic on it, and it's the performance values matrix. And I thought, well, anybody who's brave enough to put assholes into a what was actually a fairly academic paper, hey, they're my kind of people. So what basically the gist of this paper is that, when you're evaluating your employees and deciding, what do you need to do with them, as we all do, you take a look at their values and their performance. You do what I would call a napkin assessment. Do they work and play well with others? Remember, this is the kindergarten evaluation that your teacher did. Do you work and play well with others? Satisfactory, unsatisfactory. And are you a high performer or a low performer? And basically what the article says is that if you have people who are low performers that don't get along with people, just fire them fast. Don't spend a lot of energy on them. And while I understand that, every human being and everybody that we hire is worth our time and attention, sometimes we need to give our time and attention to people who deserve it more. And so the article saying, these are probably not the people that deserve your time and attention, and get rid of them. Now, you also have some nice guys who are somewhat incompetent, and they may just be incompetent at what they're doing. So you need to either manage them better and increase their competency, or move them into something where they can be more successful. Now, you can have competent assholes, which I think, well, that's a whole lot of us, right? I certainly fit in that category, or have many parts of my career. So we have a whole lot of those guys in our industry. And the solution here is to remediate, which means let's work on their assholeism, or separate them and put them in a place where their unwillingness to work and play well with others doesn't affect as many people. In other words, don't let them bring the rest of the team down. If you can't separate them and you can't remediate them, then you've got to make a different choice. And I've certainly, I see examples of competent assholes probably more than anything, though I do see a lot of incompetent nice guys. Now, the high side of this is that sometimes we have some nice guys who are competent, and we have some outstanding people who are also happen to be nice guys. And what do we do with them? And he says, of course, praise and raise. How does this really apply in your business? I don't know. I just threw this out there because I thought it was fun and interesting to talk about. I certainly know that in my practice of advising companies, I actually find the biggest challenges in the competent assholes and the incompetent nice guys. And often the best we can do with them is kind of move them maybe into this, corner right here where they're, maybe competent nice guys, or at least they're separated or put in a position where they can't fail. And if we can separate them or put them in a position we can't fail, that's probably better for me than having a competent, nice person. Outstanding, nice people, obviously, these are the folks that you want to keep. This is what we're always looking for. And that's why I have the attitude that you should always be hiring, because if a good person walks through the door, hire them. And by this chart, this would be a nice guy. If a nice guy, a nice gal walks through the door, this is somebody that you wouldn't mind trying to work with, have on a team, be involved in a task. I think just hire them and figure out what you're going to do with them later. I've had pretty good luck over the years with that philosophy, and what it allows you to do is get rid of some of the incompetent assholes. A lot of times I find that leaders are afraid to let people go because they don't have a replacement, and they're particularly afraid to let competent assholes go because they don't have a replacement and they don't want to lose that competency. So having a pretty steady stream of nice guys coming in, some of them are going to turn out to be pretty competent, and it makes it easier to let go of, well, the assholes. So, all right, but that's not what I'm here to talk about today. I want to talk about change management. In the past, change management is kind of where I've been living for the past several years. We talk a lot about, sales and marketing and strategy and all this other stuff, but mostly in the clients that I work with year round, which is the majority of my business, these are change management situations. It's not that anything's terribly wrong per se. It's just that we're trying to reach a goal. We have an objective, growth and sales and prosperity and lifestyle, and we want to enjoy our business. All these things all these objectives that we have. In order to get there and to be better at what we're already doing or fix the things we're not doing well, we have to make some changes. And change is fairly easy for me, and certainly as an outsider, it's very easy for me to go in and see what's not working, what adjustments need to be made, what process would work better. But what's difficult is implementation, because I'm not in a position to do the actual implementation. I have to rely on the leadership of the organization that's in there. Often when we do process change, we have discussions from the bottom up. We look at the task owners and say, you need to do this differently. And we don't connect it back to the bigger picture. So I want to talk about the three elements of change management, and they're in order. It's leadership, it's communication, and it's process owners. You know me, I'm not big on job descriptions. I don't think job descriptions or org charts help us much in change management. What helps us in institutionalizing change is understanding who owns an individual process and making sure that they are involved in, one, understanding the problem, two, designing a solution, and three, launching an implementation of it. And I'll give you a good example. I was several times already this year, I've worked with companies who one of the symptoms that we're working on is how to improve cash flow. And cash flow is a high level. I think I've got another slide here. I'll talk about how we do it. So cash flow is a high level issue. There are lots of processes underneath that need to be addressed. So for instance, poor cash flow could be as simply, we're invoicing too late. We're not asking for the money. We're not getting deposits. We're taking too long to close out a job. There's a whole litany of things that can contribute to poor cash flow. And of course, low profit. Low profit will contribute to poor cash flow. But in terms of invoicing, just to take a single example, I've had several clients who struggle, and I think we all have from time to time, of getting invoices out. In other words, we finished the job, we need to collect all the information, we need to get a final invoice out to the client. And if we are a fear-based sales organization, there's a tendency to avoid talking to the client about changes, additions, overtime, things that were outside of our control, in order to get the approval, in order to get the final invoice out. And there's also a challenge in getting information back from the field, back from project managers to tell us exactly what happened, so that we can close this loop with the client. And then there's just the whole process of who does the invoicing. So if I'm going to change, if I'm going to improve how we get paid, and part of that is getting invoices out sooner, I have to look at all the process owners. So I have, a process owner, somebody who might be involved in this is getting the job checked back in so that I can look for shorts. All right. So if you're a rental company, checking the job back in. So I need to have a warehouse manager check-in person as part of the process, because part of their process affects my ability to get an invoice out. I have to have project managers, people or lead techs who are out in the field. Maybe they're collecting hours. Maybe technicians are supposed to turn in show reports. They've got to be involved in a discussion about changing how we do invoicing because they contribute or hinder the process. I certainly have to have my accounts receivable person involved. Whether they generate the invoice or simply post the invoice or do collections, they have to be involved in the conversation. Salespeople have to be involved. Sales managers have to be involved. And invoicing is one of those things where on the surface you think, well, I just need to tell the salesman to invoice sooner and problem solve. But in fact, it probably touches more aspects of your company than anything else that you do. So leadership is where we start, because somebody has to own the process for process change. So the process owner for process change is always the leader in a change management situation. And leaders have to be able to make decisions based on the available information and communicate that decision and its ramifications and discuss alternatives with a diverse group of people. So here's what I want to share is how I do it. Here are the steps that are going through my mind when I'm at a company and we need to launch a process change, particularly if we need to do it quickly. And those of you who have that I've worked with, or you have worked with me, and I've spent some time in your office, have seen me do this, and I'll share some of the things that I do that represent what I'm talking about here. So it all starts when we identify an overarching issue. Recently, I was working with a client and we had this invoicing issue. We were not getting invoices out in a timely manner. And sometimes the invoice would go to a client and it would never make it to, the accounts payable department in that company or that organization. So the overarching issue is we're not getting paid. One of the symptoms behind it is how we invoice. One of the symptoms behind how we invoice was that the salespeople were actually doing the invoicing. So we go through a whole list of sub-issues or symptoms that contribute to the overall issue. We don't want to lose sight of the overall issue. The overall issue is we want better cash flow, which means we need to get paid, which means we need to get invoices out in a timely manner to the right person and follow up. In other words, we need to not only expect to be paid, we need to do the things that allow us to be paid. So we go through all this whole list of issues. Now, this organization thought, well, this is going to take a lot of time and energy and meetings to sort out, and I don't work that way. I simply got in early the next day, as I often do, and I walk around the building and I talk to people, and I went to all the process owners that I could identify in this process of getting invoicing out, and I explained the issues. I said, help me understand how we could make this better. Would this work? Would this work? Would this work? So I would test working theories and get their feedback. I'd say, what if we did it this way? And I'd find out what their objections were, and we'd talk through that. I take all that information, I go back to a conference room, I find a whiteboard like this, and I would map out the process that makes sense based on the information I got back. So this is a draft process. This is for discussion purposes only, and I always leave it out fully exposed so that anybody that walks in can see it. And very often somebody will walk in who's involved in the process, and I say, hey, while you're here, can I ask you a question? And I'll walk through and I'll test that some more. Then I gather, once I've got the draft going, I gather process owners and I say, okay, we've got the accounts, payable person, hey, I talked to you this morning. Got sales manager, I talked to you this morning. I got the warehouse manager, I talked to you this morning. I got, production manager, I talked to you this morning. I've got the general manager, I've got the controller, I've got all the players in the room, and I say, how would this draft process, if we followed this, how would that affect each of you, and what challenges do you see? And the reason I do this is when you're talking one-on-one and you're doing a trial balloon on change, everybody's going to tell you how it affects them, and you're going to go, oh yeah, that would be hard. Yeah, no, that's probably not ideal. They don't see the trade-offs that other people are going to make. But if I can get all the process owners in the room and they start to hear the trade-offs that everybody else has to make, and also they hear what other process owners are willing to do. And in this particular case, one of the objections that I was running into was people felt that the accounts payable, receivable person was too busy to do the invoicing, and that's why they had moved it to sales. I don't know where that got started, but it turns out here I have the process owners right there going, no, that's not the issue. The issue was this, and this process solves that issue. So please move the invoicing back over to me where it belongs, but the salespeople have to do this and this in order for it to work. So we talk all through it, figure out what would make it better. We made a couple of minor tweaks to it, reviewed it once again, and then we say, okay, what's keeping us from starting right now? Well, there's nothing. Now, we can send out the email and say, hey guys, we've got a new process. Talk to your manager or talk to your process owner about how it affects you. Here's the general details of it. So there's a number of ways you can launch it, but the point is we're able to launch it right that day. We don't have to wait for weeks and meetings and send out a training session and send out a long email. And we also don't do what I did many times when I was a manager and much younger and not as wise as I pretend to be now, was I would send out a very long detailed email explaining what the new process is. Any questions? Of course, people look at that and go, oh, TR sent another long drawn out email. I'll look at that when I have time. I think it had something to do with invoicing. All of a sudden they find themselves in an invoicing situation and they're trying to figure out how the email applies to them, and they don't have time. It's urgent. They follow the process they've always had, and it takes forever to get the implementation working in the right direction because no one was ever on the same page in the first place. So that's what's on my mind today. That's what I think many of us could spend some more energy on in our organizations to avoid some of the challenges in getting things done. And I think you'll get a lot more done if you do that. That's the big thing. That's what's driving all this for me, is how can I get my clients, and in your case, how can you get your team to get things done faster? And leadership is, yes, we're going to follow through with this, and I'm going to remove all the obstacles I can for you. Communication, let's talk about the challenges. Let's talk about why we don't want to do it. Let's overcome those obstacles. Let's make it the process work as well as it can, and let everyone else see how everybody is having to make sacrifices in order to make this work well. And then make sure you always tie back to the prime benefit. Why are we doing this? Why is it actually important? So, all right, any questions? I didn't think so. I'm going to take a quick pause here, and then I'm going to get to some of the questions that you have sent in. I mentioned, I think last month, that we're going to have a sales and marketing workshop. We have set the date for August 1st and 2nd. You do not have a formal email about it. Last month, I asked some folks if they were interested, if they wanted to reserve some spots. Several of you did. I offered some scenarios about how we were going to do pricing, got your feedback. Thank you very much. All of you are going to get an opportunity to register early and get some of the limited bonuses for this event. But mark your calendars. This is a save the date announcement, August 1st and 2nd, Jumpstart Sales and Marketing, 2 full days. You know me, it's going to be a fire hose of information. There's going to be some role playing. There's going to be exercises, lots of collaboration, lots of networking. I'm expecting about 50 folks. If we get more, I'll have to get a bigger room, but I'm sure the hotel can probably accommodate me. So if you want to reserve some slots for your team, top salespeople, the person responsible for marketing, person responsible for business development, you, the owner, if you need to actually understand what these people all do. Now's the time to do it. I'm probably already a third of the way full and we haven't launched it. So the launch is going to come in here in a couple of weeks, and you'll get an email right before the official launch, because you're part of the survival call. You'll get an email giving you a chance to sign up and take up some slots before the general announcement goes out. And then registration is going to close for this, by the way, very quickly. While this is August 1st and 2nd, registration might close as early as July 1st. So look at the calendar, think about who you want to send, and get ready. If you got questions, shoot me an email. I'll talk to you privately about what the what the pricing and stuff is, and when I hope you'll be able to sign up. So let me know if you're interested. All right. I'm going to quit sharing my screen because I don't think I have anything on it anymore to share. No, I sure don't. Which means that we're going to riff for a while. Again, any questions, please throw some in there, anything you want to talk about, but I've got some here in front of me. If you're willing, I'm just going to go. All right. Question that's recently come in. I feel like I'm on a talk radio now or something, or had a question about solving problems, and it goes like it says, basically, Tom, what if our problem is that we don't know how to solve problems? Okay, cool. When it comes to problem solving, and this can be, how do we discuss strategy? But mostly, I think what people are talking about when they say solve problems is they're talking about emergencies, mistakes, something's broken in a process, somebody made an error. That's often when I get this kind of a question. First of all, let me say that as a manager and as a consultant, I love errors. I think when an employee makes a mistake, it's a wonderful opportunity. One, we get to learn. We get to learn something about the employee and how they process information and how they learn. We get to learn about our process. And if the process was, if there's an opportunity to improve our process. If the mistake affects a customer, we have an opportunity to talk to a customer and solve a problem for them or make amends for the problem that we caused. It's an opportunity to dialogue with a client, which we should always welcome. If you're going to make a mistake, at least make the best of it and have a honest conversation with your client and mea culpa or make adjustments, whatever it is that you need to do. Now, when there is a problem, whatever it might be, I'm looking for, is this a human error or is it a process error? Now, all errors come from humans, right? If somebody makes a mistake or makes a choice that doesn't seem to be right or overlooks something, but there's a process behind it that allowed that to happen. If we follow process, would this problem have been avoided? Did somebody simply not follow the process? And if that's the case, if the process is fine, simply didn't follow it, we have a human error. Well, you're going to have human errors, all right? So this is not the end of the world. We need to let the individual know that you made a human error. Here's where you made your mistake in your choice, and here's why that choice exists, and how to not make it in the future. And if we have repetitive problems, we'll have a different conversation. That would speak to their competence, wouldn't it? But if it's a process error, then we need to look at the process, and the person who made the error is a great person to start with to talk about the process and how the process allowed that error to happen, because nobody really comes to work hoping they're going to make an error that day, right? For me, in process errors, which, I'm a process guy, I love process errors because we can address process errors and we can make dramatic improvements in our organization in the process of doing that. What I'm looking for in a good process is that more than one human being has to make an error in order for an error to occur. Weak processes are processes that live inside of one individual and there's no checks and balances. So for instance, a salesman putting a budget together themselves and sending it straight to a customer is process. The error in that process is there's nobody checking for mistakes, nobody checking for typos, nobody verifying pricing. If I add another set of eyes to it, did I add the right set of eyes, and is the process actually followed? So that's a very simple process. So when it comes to solving problems, when it says we don't know how to solve problems, yeah, actually you do. The real issue is you haven't, I guess this goes back to my change management thing. You haven't done probably a conscious enough job of recognizing that fixing process errors is indeed solving problems. You're never going to prevent problems. You're never going to prevent errors. You can minimize them, you can reduce the opportunity for error, and the fewer errors you make, the more excited you're going to be about having one, which means you have an opportunity to improve the process even more. If you're having errors all the time, if error just seems to be what your day is made up with, then you're ready to pull your hair out because all your team seems to do is make errors, then you and I need to have a conversation, because the solution is going to start with you. Owners and managers who are beset with errors and other issues, we're going to have to, for number one, we're going to have to address leadership. Number two, we're going to have to address process. Number three, we're going to have to address communication. Maybe not all in that order. They can be solved, they can be minimized, but there are some intentional things that we have to do to move on from that. All right, what else do I want to riff on today? Well, I guess we'll talk about uncomfortable conversations here. So an uncomfortable conversation is when you have to sit down with somebody and tell them something that they need to hear, but you don't want to be the one to tell them. We have uncomfortable conversations. It's kind of normal in business, and it doesn't have to be, boss to employee. It could be talking to a client. Well, and you can have them at home too. There's always that uncomfortable conversation with the spouse or with your kids. But in business, uncomfortable conversations, many of us are not good at having them. If you are one of those people, and when my clients who are not good at this ask me, I help them find out what their starting phrase is. The easiest way to have an uncomfortable conversation, it's kind of like, how do you get a boulder to roll down a hill? You just got to give it that first push, and that first push is your opening salvo. Often when we don't like to have uncomfortable conversations because we don't like confrontation, we're worried that the person we're going to communicate with is going to get defensive or get argumentative. They're going to escalate because that's their style. They're an asshole. So when we're dealing with people like that, we tend to avoid those conversations altogether, which people around you and this other person will see and recognize as a lack of leadership and lack of consideration for them, because you're also not solving a problem for them. So how do you start an uncomfortable conversation? For your words may differ, but you need to find words that simply say, here's how it goes. Tom, I need to have an uncomfortable conversation with you. This is hard for me. Will you just listen to me for a minute? You just push the boulder. It is now rolling down the hill, and you need to talk and you need to explain what's going on. So find your boulder pushing question. If you're worried about them being reactive, if they start to be reactive, you can say, stop. I told you at the beginning that this is uncomfortable for me and I want you to hear me out. You'll get a chance to speak in just a minute. And finish what you have to say. It's okay to let people know how you feel. I said it really bothers me when you react like that. I feel that you're being threatening to try and get me to back down. This issue is important to me. That's why I'm willing to have an uncomfortable conversation. So after I start the conversation, once I've pushed the boulder, then I need to start with the truth. The truth is, you know, when you, Tom, do these things, it has this negative effect on the company and on me or whatever it might be. So you start with the truth. You say, this conversation makes me uncomfortable, or I need to have an uncomfortable conversation with you. And here is what I perceive to be the issue. The issue is, if you present it as a fact, that's when you're going to get pushback, because apparently we have alternative facts now, but facts are always disputable. They're always a cause for argument. Nobody can argue with your feelings. Nobody can argue with your perceptions. They are your perceptions. So you can talk about these things. It's harder to direct the outcome of the conversation. However, if you start the uncomfortable conversation, you have a better chance of getting to a reasonable outcome. If you don't start it, you don't get the outcome. You don't get the benefit at all. So this question, I get this question probably twice a month. Tom, how do I tell them that? Tom, what am I supposed to say to her? We had this issue on job site. I need to call the client. What do I say? Okay, well, let's start with the truth. The truth is, I'm really sorry I have to make this phone call. I'm really sorry I have to have this conversation. I need to be, sometimes what people will say, I need to be vulnerable with you for a moment. Now, some people will jump all over you if you say something like that, but you need to find the words that work for you in your situation. And the stronger the person you are on the outside, the more vulnerable the statement needs to be. Because I know a lot of us are very strong, very forthright individuals, because it makes up for the fact that we really don't like confrontation and we don't like hurting people's feelings. Myself included. So having a way to start these conversations and knowing how to do it will make it easier for you. A little bit of practice. And the more you do it, the more you'll find that you won't have to do it, because you'll elevate your level of communication with the people that you work with. A lot of people on the call today, but you're really quiet. Let's see, what do I want to riff on next? Nah. All right, so I've been talking a lot about service proposals and selling outcomes. What I usually get are specific questions about exceptions. I have a client who we sent the new proposal format to, and they replied back that they didn't like it, they didn't understand it, they wanted that old line item proposal that they've always gotten. I don't understand. Don't make changes on me. I don't like change. What do we do with those customers? Well, how do we get them to change? That's the question. We like the service proposal concept, don't want to upset longtime customers. How do you get them to change? It's actually pretty simple. You ask permission. The mistake we don't want to make is just send them the new one. We want to ask permission first. Sometimes people will say, hey, I've got a new proposal format. I'm going to send this to you. I'm sending attach, see our new proposal format. That's not asking permission. That's letting somebody know that you just did something without permission. Asking permission is when you finish the conversation. You can say, hey, I got a question for you. We're switching proposal formats. It's different than what you've been getting in the past, and here's how it's different. Would you mind if I sent that to you, set your proposal in the new format? I'd love your feedback on it. And most people are going to say yes. So, as a matter of fact, a lot more people will say yes, that would be fine, than you think. And you'll certainly get a better response than if you just send it to them without permission. Now, for somebody who says, well, I don't know, I'm really comfortable with the old way of doing it, so let me do this. Can I send you both? So the alternative is you send them both. And then once you get feedback, hopefully they'll look at both, and you can ask them, say, okay, now help me understand why, what about the new format doesn't meet your, doesn't satisfy your needs, and what would I need to do to, pull over from the old format to make it work better? In other words, find out what part of the transactional proposal is popular with them, and maybe do a side-by-side comparison and show them how the information is actually there, or determine how you can provide that information without actually providing the entire transactional proposal. When I've been involved with this exchange with some of my clients, sitting next to salespeople, very often what we learn is the customer likes the old transactional proposal, but not for the reasons we think. We always think they're doing that price comparison and looking at each line item and comparing it to the job from last year, making sure it's exactly the same and you didn't slip anything by on them. And in fact, many times they were looking at something completely different. They're looking for a phrase, a product, a name. They're looking for their whoopee. Their whoopee is that thing that makes them feel confident that everything's going to be normal and okay. And if we can find out what that is, we can make sure that we put that whoopee into their proposals. For instance, back when I was selling shows, and this is 20 years ago, the client's whoopee was a particular sound person. They wanted to know that sound person was going to be included in the job. And if I didn't mention that sound person, they panicked. They thought, well, we weren't going to provide them. So what I found out was I could do anything I wanted in the proposal. I even had a lot of flexibility on pricing as long as I put the whoopee in there, and they saw that, and then they could just pretty much, they didn't look for anything else. So transition and service proposal, ask permission. If you need to, send both versions, and then have a debriefing conversation with the client. Ask them, what their impression of it is, find out what the differences is, and say, okay, well, next time, if I take this and put it in here, can I migrate you over? Now, the third case scenario is if the client absolutely will not give up on the detail that they're used to getting, but you still need to transition to the service proposal because, well, you're going to have to do it. It's your business. Just put the detail in as an addendum. You've heard me say this before. Put the line items without the pricing, in an appendix, in an annex to the document. Continue to do business the way it needs to be done. And then have an honest conversation with yourself about whether this is a client that's buying what you're selling. I see who's on the call here. You're all in the service industry. You're all service sellers. And if you've got somebody who's holding you to a transactional proposal concept, I question whether or not that's a client you really need in the long run. Yeah, there's a question in here about, starts with, we can't change anything around here because of our customers. It was like, yeah, I get that. All right, where's this one I want to talk about? All right, I want to talk, this is kind of a salesy question, but this is high-level sales, so this is really business strategy that I'd like to talk about. So the question is about changing from becoming transactional. So I was just talking about service proposals, which is moving from a transaction to a service model in your selling model. Question says, we are trying to be less transactional, so what are we trying to become? And the question was semantic. He goes, well, basically, I need a new word. Tom, I need a noun. I need a modifying word that says what we're going in, what we're turning into if we're not going to be transactional. And the word is transformational. So we're moving from transactional to transformational. And let me tell this in a story. The story I tell about transformation, well, I've told the story about sales. My first sales job was selling flower seeds door to door. I won't bore you with all the details. As a 10-year-old kid selling a packet of seeds. It could not be more transactional than that. I kid you not. It can't be more transactional. So the annex to the story, is how could I take a transaction and transform it into a service? And when I'm dealing with companies, you're trying to understand how they will move from transactions to service. This is the example I use. What would you do to make selling packets of seeds a service? What would your approach be? And what is a service? Well, service is selling the end result, not the plan. A packet of seeds, you put them in dirt, flowers grow is a plan. I'm selling a piece of a plan. What's the outcome? The outcome is I've got some beautiful flowers. So if we're going to convert this from a transaction, if we're going to transform it into an outcome, how would you sell differently? And I pondered this one day because I thought, well, 10-year-old me is not going to get this. I'm not sure you can. Well, you might be able to teach a 10-year-old. You just couldn't have taught 10-year-old me how to do this. But if I were to teach someone how to do this, then I would look at what does the outcome mean to people in a given home. So you walk up to a home, and first thing I'm probably going to do as I'm walking down the street is I'm going to look for a house that looks really nice, has a nice front yard, and I'm going to walk up to the home and I'm going to see the nice things about this particular yard. And I'm going to knock on the door and say, ma'am, I'm Tommy. I live down the street, and I was noticing the beautiful flower bed in that house over there, and I walk by your house all the time, and I think it's really lovely. But would you love your house more if there were flowers in your flower bed year round? And what if that could happen for you? I'm never going to show her flower packets, right? I'm just going to talk about what's the outcome. Well, wouldn't it be nice to have flowers? And she goes, well, yes, Joe, I just don't have time to do all of that. You have to go to the store. You got to plant them. You have to replace them 3 or 4 times a year and everything. I said, what if it just happened? What would that be worth to you? Now, here's what I can do for you. I can sell you. Now I can pull out the flower. I can sell you a packet of flower seeds. Matter of fact, I can sell you 4 packets because there's 4 different times a year, so you need 4 different types of flowers. Or I can make sure that those flowers appear in your flower box 4 times a year. That's transformational. So if we can take our rental products, our box sale products, and convert them into an outcome, that's what transformation is. That's what we're moving towards when we're leaving transactional. So my comment here is that when you recast a transactional product into a service, you are becoming transformational. And I got to tell my flower seed story again. All right, what else we have here? Well, I've already talked a little about process owners, so I want to go into that question again. Let's talk about value adds. Again, this is I see the question coming in. I'm going to come to that right in a minute. Repositioning value adds. My motto on value adds, a value add is something that's free. A value add is something you're doing to try and, you're putting lipstick on a pig by giving the client something away for free. The question starts as we've relied on value adds bundled into our proposals. Can you you recommend unbundling them, and I do. Can you explain that further? So let me kind of restate what I've said in the past about unbundling. My goal is for you to move to a service proposal of some ilk. You don't have to use mine. You just need to move away from transactional proposals. My service proposal has options in it, and the options are in there for a reason. Each option is contrast to the other 2. So if I've got 3 options, which is my ideal number, sometimes I put 4 or 5, but generally I put 3 options in there. Each one sheds a different light on the other ones. If I unbundle value adds, I'm generally taking them out of what I've done in the past and making sure that option 1 is the bare bones of the job. So when I teach you about responding to an RFP in a blind bid situation, you always respond bare bones. You don't calculate any extras. You don't put any value adds in or anything that's going to make your proposal not compare well with someone else's. Somebody called me the other day saying they just lost a job because they'd put all the hotel rooms into the order as a live event job, and the guy who won it didn't. Well, duh. Based on the RFP, you shouldn't have put those in there, even though it wasn't a value add. But my point is, Option one is always going to be the stripped down bare bones version that meets the spec without any embellishment. Option two is when you can put some value adds in, but now you're putting a value on them. So we get away from the idea of free, we put a value on everything. Option three is adding even more value. But Tom, how do I get back to the price where the value add is free? It's in how you discount. So now when I discount a job, I'm discounting the entire job instead of giving a value add for free. And that allows the buyer to distribute the discount wherever they think, wherever it makes them feel better. I had one example of a client who was giving away way too many value adds. And we got on a phone call with a client, and I stopped and asked the client a question, and it found out that half the value adds they were getting, they didn't even care about. And these weren't cheap. So it was like, let's think twice about how we give away value adds. And if you unbundle them, you'll quickly find out which ones are valuable to the customer. And then you can always discount back to the number you want, but now the discount is kind of applying to everything. And if you remove a value add, then you're going to save some money. Anyway, let me get to I got a couple questions here. First one is, oh man, you guys write long questions. In many of our internal processes, our managers have lost sight of the end goal and are simply trying to protect themselves from blame, finger pointing. This makes our internal customer culture a disaster with people tiptoeing around others. Our biggest mistakes come when multiple things fall down at once. How can we start changing culture to move away from the blame game, attempting to fix human error towards accepting responsibility as leaders, owning the mess? Thank you. That's a great question. How do we stop the blame game? It comes down to a question that I decided not to answer, but now I am. It's about who owns process. So let's take this back to process. Blame game comes from when we are assigning human error to something in order to not have it assigned to us. Most of our errors, most of our blame is not human error, it's process error. So figure out what the process is. So let's go back to the process, and then our uncomfortable conversation is about what are we going to do to fix the process, not who are we going to blame. So this tiptoeing is because we're making mistakes personal. So what I would do in that, and when I've been in an office where this goes on, so we'll gather the players together and say, look, we made this mistake, we had this problem happen, help me understand the process, and help me understand where this should have been solved or could have been corrected, or what triggered this thing to happen, and make it a process thing. Now, very often that community is going to, because the culture is blame, is going to turn it into a blame game saying, well, Matt should have done this, or John should have done this, or Bob should have done that. You say, yes, based on the process we have, you're correct, but what should the process be? Okay, so let's move that. As leaders, we need to move the blame away from the individuals, move the blame to the process so that we can spread it throughout the team, and hopefully we can fix it. So change the dialogue. Change how you communicate about these issues and make it okay to talk about. I knew I had succeeded on this back when I managed, when people would come to me and they sit down and said, Tom, I screwed up, and I need to tell you about it. Rather than saying, when people come in and say, we made a mistake, which, well, actually, I made the mistake. When people come in and say, look, I screwed up, okay, that means that they feel comfortable talking about that, because they're not going to get, rung over the coals. They're not going to get beaten up about it. We're going to find a solution to the problem. We're going to figure out a way to fix it in the future. So it all comes back, process guy, right? It all comes back to understanding who process owners are, and start talking about things in terms of process owners, not hierarchy. Blame game is a vertical culture. That's top-down management. Companies with top-down management, everything's, triggered off an org chart, who works for whom. That's what triggers blame games. People who work as a team, who all work in processes that may be owned by somebody who works, lower on the org chart than you. We had a saying, back at Alford, and I hope they still do, because one of the wonderful things about the culture was that the person on show side is always in charge. The person in front of the client is always in charge. So if somebody calls in from show side, it doesn't matter if the president of the company answers the phone, the person on the other end is in charge. Because in that process, they are holding the hot potato, which is the client. It's the client breathing down their neck while they're talking on the phone. So that's not, it's top down leadership doesn't fix the problem, because the president's going to go, well, it's not my problem. You should have called someone else. It's process. So let's figure out what the processes are, and that will work better. Thank you for that. And we have another question here. Thank you. In your experience of working with production clients who have worked with clients who lack experience and cannot provide adequate details for their own productions. We have a very large client that has many project managers, all of which have very little experience. Extracting details about their event is painful, often late in the process. Okay, so far it's normal. Everything's normal so far. Extracting details about their events is painful and often very late in the process, leading to challenges in providing the best possible outcome per our standards. The client is always very satisfied, but the events push our processes outside of our comfort zone. We have taken to almost PMing the events for them by asking the right questions of venues and staff and providing them with production and advanced documents. We have to hold their hands the whole way, stressing out our account managers. How would you improve on this relationship? So the relationship here is that the client's not able to provide you the information that you feel you need to do your job well. And I would say find more clients like this. I know that's not the answer you wanted to hear. This is a fantastic client. Here's a client that absolutely needs you. Who cares if you have to do groundwork and front work for them? This is value add that you can unbundle. Now, if this client happens to be unappreciative, and this is triggered by the fact that we have a totally ungrateful client that we bail their butt out all the time, and they act like they're doing all the work, but we're the ones doing, the heavy lifting. Okay, whine. We're show people, we whine. Unless this is a problematic client, I'd say this is great. Expect to do that work. Provide the extra people, the production manager, the project manager, a dedicated person to this project to do that work and share that information back with the client, involve them in the process. You're making yourself valuable and indispensable. Assuming we want to keep this client and we want to improve our business relationship, because it's based on who's asking the question here, my suspicion is you sold a transaction and the client is asking for full service. They're expecting full service on a transactional arrangement, and it's creating stress because you're falling outside of the scope of the transaction that you sold. Again, I think this is ideal. You need to move to a service-minded mode. You're selling an outcome. The outcome is you're going to take care of all of these things for the client. Hopefully let them know who did it in the end run. So I would actually change the way I write proposals for this client to express what it is that you're actually doing. And again, option one is, here's what you asked for in terms of a transaction. Bare bones, bare minimum. We are responsible for this. The client is responsible for this. Option two, here are the client responsibilities that we take over in option two, and then here's additional value you get from that option. And then option three is something that's even better, where, what I'm seeing here is this client has PMs. Well, why don't we just eliminate the need for them to have a PM at all? Why don't we reduce their costs by taking that burden over here, charging them for it because you're doing the work anyway? So that would be option three. So this is the classic transformational discussion about how do you move from transaction to an outcome-based situation. You need an ideation session to understand how to extract the value of this client, how to figure out which problems you're going to solve for them. Matter of fact, if you guys are going to be on the next call for the sales and marketing, we're going to talk more about, I have another ideation methodology I'm going to share with you or reiterate or reshare with you. So yeah, embrace this client. You want more clients like this. If you're and the concern I know is always going to be, well, if we try and charge them more, or we point out the fact or that they're not holding up their end, they're going to be offended and take their business elsewhere. Yes, that is always a risk. However, if they are as high maintenance as they sound, they're going to go someplace else and they're not going to be happy with the outcome. So if you're providing great customer service, make sure that the things that you're doing are appreciated, that they understand what it is that you're doing, and then repackage it so that they can consistently get that in the future. So good question. The client's always very satisfied. That's worth something. All right, great question. Thank you so much. So, hey, here we are at the end. I just want to say, hey, have a great Memorial Day weekend, everybody. Remember why we have Memorial Day weekend, and keep those who have given their lives for us in your thoughts and prayers, and come back refreshed and full of barbecue or whatever it is you enjoy doing, and take on another week. We've got, I think, one more of these survival calls, and that'll wrap us up for the year. Hopefully you guys are checking out the archives in the library, because you have access to the library. Take advantage of that, and well, there you go. We'll have this recording up on your page here later on this afternoon. So thanks, everyone. Good to virtually see you. Have a great one. Cheers. Bye-bye.